right, welcome everybody. We're gonna start pretty much on time. We've had a thousand registrations, over 1,000 registrations, so it may take Zoom a couple minutes to get everyone in, but and apologies for that, but great to see you and welcome. It is absolute pleasure to get to spend a few minutes with Kevin Indig. So Kevin works with, I've got to look at the list here, has worked with Airbnb, Shopify, Reddit, Meta, Ramp, G2, Toast, Asana, Upwork, Zero, Hims, House, Airwallex, and a bunch of other companies whose entire business models depend on getting found, getting discovered. In addition to that, he somehow finds time to publish an excellent Substack called The Memo, which isn't just like light curated content, it's deep dives and original research. I'm a subscriber. I recommend it, and we will send a link to it tomorrow when we send the email around with the recording. All that is to say, it's suffice to say he's a very busy guy and a very brilliant guy, and I'm thrilled he's able to spend an hour with us. Welcome, Kevin.
Matt, after this intro, I'm so glad to be here.
All right. We've got, as I said, like hundreds of questions submitted, over 1,000 people registered. Majority of our attendees are not SEO experts. They're not super deep on this. A lot of them are running startups or running marketing for startups. And so as you can imagine, we're all looking for shortcuts. So let's just jump to that. Is this create an opportunity for startups to beat incumbents in terms of, like leapfrogging them in terms of getting recommended or creating a new marketing channel? Have you seen any startups who are able to take on the big guys and do something clever?
Absolutely. So there are multiple things that decide how visible you are in AI. When I say AI, I mean ChatGPT, Google AI overviews, AI mode, Gemini, Perplexity, Copilot, all the different AI chatbots and surfaces. So I'll just use AI as the standard for that now. And as I mentioned earlier, there are different ingredients to being visible on AI. One big ingredient is authority. So essentially, how known are you? How good is your reputation? And by how many people? And of course, that's where incumbents have a big benefit. But startups, by definition, have the benefit that they must come out of a niche, right? So a startup cannot be successful if they tackle Salesforce head on, right? If they're just another enterprise CRM, no chance. There is an incumbent for a reason. So you want to either grow with a small niche or just focus on one niche, right? There's a famous saying along the lines of, if you get 1% market share of Salesforce, you have a unicorn. And so that is also true in the AI visibility world, because you focus on a niche, on a subset or sub-vertical of a bigger market, and that's where you want to win. And because you focus on that subset, you have a much higher chance to create stronger awareness, create better content, and position yourself accordingly. So yes, it is possible to attack big incumbents, but only if you carry the startup mindset over to AI visibility as well.
Okay. Can you think of like an example or a hypothetical to make that more concrete for us?
Yeah, totally. So sticking with Salesforce, right? If you go after the topic of enterprise CRM or even just CRM in general, it's going to be a really hard time. But if you figure out something like, or if you position yourself in something like CRM for agencies with client-approved workflows, right? Something very specific, or CRM for law firms with, I don't know, more than 10 employees, something very specific, then you have a very high chance. And so one of my clients right now is in the task management space. And it's a big company, you can probably figure out who it is. And what we're seeing is as we're going deeper into verticals, so it's like a reverse vertical strategy, where first there was the big task management space, and that company won in that space. And now they're doubling down on verticals. You see that there are established startups that already are pretty good in those verticals, right? So in some cases, you actually see the reverse story where you have a big incumbent, and because the market is structurally changing, they have to focus more on verticalization. And they see that there are already established startups that maybe do task management in the construction space, which is very particular, right? So those would be examples where startups can develop a competitive benefit. And then, of course, they grow from one subset to another, or from one vertical to the other. And then eventually they might be able to disrupt the big incumbent.
Okay. Thank you. And you mentioned, how to improve your chances of getting cited. And I know in your newsletter, yesterday or this morning, you talked about the number one way to get specifically cited rather than just basically having the model use your information is to publish original data. So talk a bit about that and what are the other major factors to increase your chances of getting cited?
The citation game goes back to this concept of training data. So LLMs have a training data cutoff, meaning when you develop a new model, say ChatGPT 5.5, you need to take a big part of the training is a corpus of data from the web, from books, from YouTube videos, from all the good stuff, right? Um, and so there's a knowledge inventory or a brain that LLMs have, and everything that is newer than that training data cutoff needs to come from live retrieval, right? Meaning needs to come from a live web search. And if you want to, you basically need to provide new information about a new topic that doesn't exist yet. And that's why this idea of primary research or first party data is so incredibly powerful. And by the way, I mean, there's a million other good reasons to do this besides just the AI visibility part, right? There's all sorts of audience building benefits. But coming back to AI search, LLMs crave structured data. They crave numbers, lists, reports, benchmarks, case studies, and they crave net new data that helps them give a better answer. So if you can create that data, first of all, like that's a big, big benefit. Second, it's not enough to just publish new data. You also need to target a topic that is actually relevant in that search, right? So if we're staying with Salesforce, if you publish a benchmark about employee retention, that might be cool, and maybe you get some press coverage from that, but that does not help LLMs recommend you when it comes to CRM. So if you create, on the other hand, a CRM benchmark or kind of 2026 report, and you answer verbatim a lot of questions that people have, that is the 1-2 punch combo that gets you cited, and that builds strong defenses because it's very hard to compete or to displace you.
Okay, so in your niche, original data, answer specific questions verbatim that people would have and present the data in a structured way.
Correct.
Now, a couple of questions to follow up on that. First of all, and you mentioned also in your article, it sounds like LLMs seem to reward, as you said, a balanced sentiment and kind of, well, data, I mean, by its nature. But traditional marketing would say the most effective brands are emotionally resonant, they're opinionated. So does that mean that essentially good brand marketing is actually going to undermine your visibility, or am I setting up like a false dichotomy or thinking about this wrong?
No, I think you think along this. Think about this the right way. The way that I would reframe it is that when it comes to the data, you need to be dry like a scientist. When it comes to the storytelling, you can be a full-blown marketer, right? So it's absolutely fine to really bring in the drama when it comes to the story. But when it comes to the data, you need to have a clear methodology. You need to show clear caveats. You basically want to write a science paper, research paper, or at least kind of communicated in a way of like a Wikipedia article, right? Wikipedia gets cited a lot for several reasons. But one of it is that it's fairly, I would say, objective about most topics. And so that's how you want to approach it. Be this scientist that pairs up with a, strong marketer, and then that will absolutely work.
Okay, so keep the data, and then bring the opinions and the emotion into the story, the interpretation. Now, one of the other data points you cited showed that most crawlers seem to focus on the first 20% of a long page. So is that a thing, like keep your content short, get the meat at the top of the page?
Yes, you want to keep it short in the sense that it should be concise, which can be two different things, right? The piece can be 3,000 words long and still be concise. Essentially, you want to cut out the fluff, cut out the lore, at least in the extreme AI visibility world, right? In the reality that we live in, there's probably going to be a compromise, right? But let's just switch back to that multiverse of AI visibility where it's just about that. You want to cut out all the fluff, no storytelling, no lore, just pure facts, very easy to parse, very easy to understand. Every sentence can stand on its own, no passive wording. Those things work really well. What I've seen is when I analyzed over 1 million prompts or answers to prompts, better said, is that LLMs have that preference for the first 20, 30% of content. And there's a bunch of explanations for that. One is it really helps to have a exact summary or key takeaways or too long didn't read section at the top of your content to basically summarize the piece, right? And you help the LLM vet if there is more in the rest of your content to be found. The other part is that if you write in the classic journalism style, which means leading with the lead, the most important facts first, that is also a strong kind of way to appeal to LLMs because they don't need to go through all of your stuff. Now, they will retrieve all your content, don't get me wrong, right? But LLMs are looking for these textual chunks. They're looking for the sentences or sections that really answer the question that they're trying to deliver. And so front loading your content with the most important information, your key takeaways. If you're a fan of Barbara Minto like me, then you want to apply the Minto pyramid. That seems to be the best way to go about it. And it could be because LMs are trained on that kind of writing, or it could be because most of the web that is citation worthy actually follows that structure. That I don't know, but that's the format that has shown the best effectiveness.
Okay, so in that way, it's sort of like a human. A human is curious. They want answers to specific questions, and they have a limited patience and attention span. So you don't want to bury the lead. And in that sense, same thing, same rules apply for LLM content.
Totally, man. Like one thing to add is, most LLMs have a budget of how many tokens they extract from your page, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have to go back, but I think the standard for most Google surfaces right now is around 250 to 300 tokens, which is not a lot. And so LLMs really filter for the most useful, specific, crisp, and new information.
Okay, so structurally, we want to move away from embedding all of our questions and answers in a single long page and towards putting them into separate shorter pages that are question and answer oriented and concise as possible.
Yes, that seems to work. And some people will say, "Hey, wait! I created this long FAQ page, and it's getting cited a lot," and that is also true. So it makes sense, I would say, for everyone to have a single page where they create questions and answers about all of the basic questions about a company. Right? You can just go Google your own brand name and then see what Google shows in terms of questions. Just answer these questions on one single page. That can really help. But when we're talking about a scaled content strategy, then yes, you want to keep it short, concise, bring it to the point. And the reality is, most topics are completely overloaded with content, meaning most brands write too much about a topic. If you actually structurally think about an answer, most content can be a lot shorter.
Yes. I mean, I write my newsletter and I try to keep it to 2 minutes. And I keep being reminded of that adage of like, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time. So I wrote you a long one.
Yes, Mark Twain.
Yeah, exactly. So for the longest time, Google always said, write for humans. And then, of course, throughout the history of SEO, there have been all these model updates because people have figured out that you don't actually write for humans. There's these dark arts tactics that, actually work better. So, so is it true this time? Should we just write for humans, or is it just a different set of games and tricks you could also play?
The answer is yes, and the answer is also no. A consultant would say that, right? So look, here's where that's true. You want to write for humans because user behavior is still the number one ingredient when it comes to showing up in search and classic search. And classic search is still the skeleton of the body that is AI search. There's still a big impact from search rank. There's more to say about that. On the other hand, though, we have now crossed the threshold, according to Cloudflare, where more bots are sending web requests than humans. And so I think the reality is that there's two different types of content. There's kind of the more Substacky, we don't care that much about search type of content, where I write, and it's paradoxical, but I advise companies and AI search strategies, and I do not write for AI search, right? What I do is more the audience building type of writing. That is probably what Google wants the most. But the reality is, when it comes to performance writing or performance content, then writing for humans is relative. So where I land about that question, because I sometimes get that from executives, is write it so that a human would enjoy it, But do not be Malcolm Gladwell or Mark Twain, right? This is not a story. At the end of the day, if the bots don't like the content, then the humans won't see it unless you have a direct channel to the audience. And then again, we're talking about a different type of content. So the performancey type of content needs to thread the needle on human readability and value, but absolutely be digestible for bots.
Okay, gotcha. So it's sort of a combination of both. And you talked about, sometimes you're writing what you call performance content, sometimes you're writing what you call audience building content. So I know kind of in the old days, you could just write informational content and rank, and even relatively generic informational content and rank for those terms. And I know now, LLMs are just going to actually tell you the answer. They're not going to send someone to a page to find out how to convert, ounces to grams or whatever. Um, so is there a shift in sort of the content diet? Maybe diet's not the right word, but the types of content that organizations should be creating.
It absolutely is 100%. Creating informational content does not really make sense anymore. And some people will argue, wait, we should build topical authority in a space. And yeah, maybe, but my practical guidance to clients is that purely informational content, glossary style content. If you want to create that, do it with AI. Don't invest too much effort into this because those are basic questions that LMs are going to answer fast. And studies have shown over and over that when users get the answer they're looking for in the Google search results or from ChatGPT, they're not going to click through to a website, with the rare exception of maybe medical questions, right? So the reality is that the content that is still useful is based on primary research, as we've said before. It's based on experience, and that is actually a very rare good. Or it is something net new that the audience hasn't thought about before, right? Or that is kind of more thought leadership type of content. And I would argue that the right diet is a mix of all three macronutrients. Um, and so this is where we go back to like more audience building, more PR type of content, more product marketing content. And when you see what's successful these days, it's a lot of experiential content, meaning instead of saying, here are the 10 best, I don't know, CRMs, you want to write something like, I spend 100 hours stress testing 3 CRMs, and here's like a detailed breakdown, something where the audience understands that somebody put real effort into the content. And by the way, Google does try to measure content effort. And something that is harder to replicate. So the harder it is to replicate for another company, actually, the more valuable the content and usually also the more successful. But it's a hard shift because it is harder and harder to then understand the demand for that type of content, right? The classical information SEO type of stuff, it was much, much easier to kind of understand if that's valuable or not because we have search volume, we can directly map it to a keyword. The new experience first type of content is much, much harder to forecast. And so it's less comfortable for most companies, and that's why they shy away. But sticking to those old guns is usually what gets you into trouble.
Okay. So your takes, new original content, firsthand experience type content. People are going to publish this content in different places. So I'm wondering what does and doesn't get consumed or crawled in the model's training or when they're going out and doing real-time searches, including infographics, LinkedIn, X, videos. Do you have a list like these days? And is that list changing often?
I love that question because it really points at the contrast between classic SEO and AEO or AI search or whatever we want to call it. So the answer is yes, first of all, you need a more audience building type of content strategy, and you need an audience building type of distribution. So what we're seeing, for example, in the data is that YouTube is probably the most important platform now when it comes to Google's AI properties, meaning AI overviews, AI mode, Gemini. YouTube is incredibly often cited and correlates highest with brand mentions, right? So my first step would actually be to say, hey, if we want to be visible for these types of prompts or for certain prompts, let's think about our YouTube strategy. Second, you can and should repurpose your content with that in mind. And repurposing content is not new at all. I mean, that's been out there since 10 plus years, but it still holds very much true, right? So you can have a piece on your, say, I don't know, a blog or resource center or whatever you want. You can distribute that through an email newsletter. You should also turn that into a YouTube video, and you should cut that into pieces and then distribute the clips on social media. LinkedIn gets cited incredibly often, obviously for B2B content, Reddit more for consumer type of content. But it's really that type of engine that brings the results, because you don't want to just gate content on your site unless you have really good reason to, right? But you need to set all the content free. Good examples are that, classic white paper or reports that are only available through PDF or only available on a strongly animated landing page. Like if you do that, you also need to make sure that that type of content is available elsewhere where it's easy to retrieve and to cite for LLMs. The worst thing that can happen to you is you put all that effort into creating an awesome piece of content, and then LMs cannot get it because it's hidden behind some paywall or behind some gate.
Okay. So that piece of advice hasn't changed, which is if you have good original content, distribute it in as many places as possible, and it will be seen. And then you mentioned Google particularly looks at YouTube videos. Is that for AI overviews, Gemini, or both? Or are those the same thing under the covers?
For both. So AI modes, Gemini, AI overviews, even like more and more also in ChatGPT. But yeah, I would say YouTube investment is from several perspectives a really good idea. Not just because of the AI visibility, but also because this is harder to create. So maybe not every competitor wants to invest in the same type of format, and it builds more trust, right? It builds more relatability. Seeing someone like you and I right now is a very different thing than reading a interview as a text transcript. It's just much more relatable. So good reasons to invest in YouTube overall.
Well, this is definitely going on YouTube, so don't worry about
Good,
that.
good. That's where it should be.
There was one question from the group. When you are publishing original data, does statistical significance matter? Are these LLMs able to think about and discount evidence based on rigor?
They don't. They will not kind of stress test your data, right? So you could theoretically fake it. But I would argue that the whole point about creating that and being visible in AI search is so that humans can see it, right? And so if you don't have the rigor on that end, that can be problematic. But they will pay attention to kind of common classifiers of research, right? Like limitations, methodology, abstract, all that kind of stuff. So you almost want to make it look like a science paper, maybe a bit easier to read and like less technical writing, less science writing. But at the end of the day, I have not found any evidence that they will actually see if this research is legit or not.
But you should probably still use good data on the
Yes,
long
yes,
term
yes.
for
Be
no other
honest.
reason than karma.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've gotten pretty deep here on, engines and crawlers and token budgets and getting cited. For a startup with limited budget, what are the highest leverage tactics?
So first, you need to make sure that all of your content is retrievable. I'm actually working on a new report that's coming out on Monday about how easy it is for agents to retrieve information from B2B sites. And what I've found is that pricing information is the hardest to retrieve for several reasons. One is because pricing is gated or obfuscated or just not there. So one benefit you have if you're lean and if you're attacking an incumbent is just be transparent about your pricing, right? Um, Two, LMs get stuck more and agents get stuck more on websites than people might think. So you want to like even at the very basis, use Claude and ChatGPT to like ask it for specific information that is on your website and see if it has it, and if it cites your site or if it cites another site, right? So, being agent retrievable, that's the buy-in here, right? So that's the minimum viable scope. Two, you want to think about content that isn't or questions that are not answered yet, right? So you start with a set of prompts, and maybe 10 or 20 prompts about your category, about your product, etc. And then you want to see like, is there good content out there? Is there better content that you can create? And these can be articles again on your blog, or some of the other platforms that we spoke about before. But essentially, you want to attack from a position from an information position, right? Is there other questions like I don't know, maybe some specific questions about Salesforce that you can cover and then persuade people to go with your product. So content is number two. And then number three, this is probably, once you're in the game for a little longer, is you want to think about a PR strategy. And PR not necessarily in the sense of traditional media, but much more in the sense of new media, right? So what unique research can you put out there? Can you put out some press releases? Can you maybe get into some media, if not tier one media, but at least some media? Can you get it into some Substacks, right? Into some blogs? Can you collab with influencers to get this information out there? So three is thinking about your information distribution, but that is preceded by having good content and something to say in the first place. So I'd say covering these three will already get you pretty far. Most companies are still in level one, right? A few companies play level 5 or 10.
Okay. So a couple follow-ups on that. The PR thing, how does that work? I don't know if this is still about backlinks or if the LLM just knows, oh, this reputable publication is mentioning this company who published this data, or how does that work?
Mentions are the most important thing. Backlinks are kind of like they still in studies they still show significance, but I think this is much more because of the mention on a strong authoritative site and less because it's actually linked. So yes, you want to aim for mentions, and two, there are kind of shortcuts like syndication. Syndication is a great way. It still very much looks like LMs do not differentiate between sponsored content and kind of organic, non-sponsored content. So if you can syndicate or run advertorials on strong publishers and news outlets, that is a good idea. Two, of course, classic advertising, right? Like advertising in on publishers again can lead to a very similar effect. And then three, as I mentioned, collab with influencers, whether that's like Substackers, bloggers, or sometimes even like LinkedIn people, but just getting the content out on these platforms and having it shared by someone else who's reputable in the space, that alone can go a long way. And then if you have the means, maybe through investors, right? If you're funded by Andreessen Horowitz, then you get help with that kind of tier one distribution. But even just having great brand assets, great video, great launch video, strong narrative on your site, and getting that out there, that in itself can help. But yeah, you want to think about it almost like the classic PR clips.
Okay. And then you mentioned answering original questions, answering good questions. And earlier you had this great advice, which was just Google your brand, see what questions people also asked on the search results page, and answer them. So more broadly, how do you come up with good questions?
Yeah, the best way in my mind is to talk to your audience, talk to your customers, right? Most B2B customers, sorry, B2B brands will have at least some form of sales going on. If they're targeting enterprise, then obviously it's all about sales. And sales has conversations, right? The job of sales is most number one job is to talk to prospects. These conversations are recorded these days and tools like Chorus or Gong. And so what you want to do is you want to take 30, 40, 50 transcripts of sales conversations. You can split them into closed won or lost. And then ask these transcripts questions through AI. So you can upload them to a Claude or use a more specific tool, and then you ask what problems are the customers facing? What do they use right now? What alternatives do they consider? Who are they? Right, like all these classic audience or product questions to deeply understand your customers, and then you write about them, right? Like we did this at Ramp. I worked on the search strategy at Ramp 2 years ago, and we did exactly that process. We asked prospects, accountants, bookkeepers, all that kind of stuff. Like what do you use right now? What alternatives do you prefer? What do you know about expense management? Blah blah blah. And we just created blog content that performed incredibly well because we knew that our customers think about these questions, and we have good answers.
Okay. So use all the information you've already got from your customer conversations, go through and abstract out the common questions that you know firsthand from your customer interaction that people have. That's a good place to start.
Yes.
Um, so I'm just going through, there's a bunch of good questions in the Q&A here, so I'm going through a few of these. Um, while I'm going through those, I was also wondering in terms of metrics. So it seems like a lot of the traditional metrics either are meaningless or blind or both. So first of all, like Are there good, readily available leading indicators that your AEO, is it AEO or GEO, right? Like, have we decided yet?
Nobody knows. I hope it's none
Okay.
of these. I don't like any of these. But yeah, it's two camps right now. Metrics is a good question. I get this a lot from execs and investors. And so the way you want to think about metrics is the following. In classic search and classic SEO, you had an attributable funnel, right? A click funnel. People search, they click, they convert. And you can attribute that fairly well, though not perfectly. In the new AI search world, that does not exist because people don't click. I have a very strong point of view on that, but I think if you're measuring traffic as an indicator of whether your AI strategy works, you're in a really bad place. We're navigating towards a almost zero click world, maybe a 1% click world where the only clicks that are still arriving are going to be people buying. But you see studies over and over showing, including my own studies, showing that people don't click on citations, right? It's like 1%. There was a ChatGPT leak showing 0.69% of click-through rate on a citation that had like I think 1 million impressions or something. So people don't click. What I see is that when people get a recommendation or they find an answer to a question that they have, they will usually open a new tab and go directly to the site and sign up. So very hard to attribute. The best attribution is actually self-report attribution, where you ask people, how did you hear about us? And then they select AI or ChatGPT. So you really want to invest in that. As a matter of fact, one of my clients right now, they're seeing 10% of net new clients coming from AI. So it's really significant. But when you just look at traffic, referral traffic, you're not going to. It's like I don't know, 3% maybe of your total organic traffic if you're lucky. So the better way to think about this is in the leading indicators, lagging indicators, and then in the middle you have quality guardrails. So leading indicators are all the things that people talk about: AI mentions, sentiment, citations, citation share, share of voice, classic SERP rank. Those are leading indicators that are telling you whether you're on the right track. Maybe even impressions. Guardrail metrics is when you're showing up in the right context that you want to show up, right? So you can be mentioned on AI, but you can also be mentioned in a very bad place, right? So if you're LastPass and you had that big security incident, right, then you might show up, but maybe as an example for a company that or a brand or product that people should not buy, right? No flag on LastPass, but you get my point, right? So you want to understand like where do we show up and how do we show up, and then lastly, lagging indicators. So that's where self-report attribution is valuable. Mentions in your CRM, right? Or customers mentioning that they found you on ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. But then also, of course, self-reported attribution, revenue, pipeline. That's where you think about these types of metrics. But it's really the construct of leading and lagging and quality metrics that help you understand how you trend over time. Makes sense of that three-dimensional construct that is AI search.
Okay. So we just need to have a little faith that if people are asking these questions and we're the right answer to the questions and we're getting mentioned and cited, even though we're not tracking the clicks, yeah, there's an act of faith, a leap of faith that that's actually going to bring you good quality traffic. And then you look at, are we getting traffic and is our conversion holding strong? And then round that out with self-reported attribution metrics to kind of sanity check it. So if you get a bunch of traffic and conversion goes way down, for example, then that's probably a bad thing, even though we can't directly attribute it to AI answers or recommendations.
Exactly.
Okay. There were a couple of questions back on the YouTube thing. Does it matter if it's shorts or long form or if it's listed in the transcripts or not?
Great question. Transcript super important. Transcript is what LLMs read to understand a video. So you want to pay attention to that. Long form or short form matters a bit less, but your chances are higher with long form content. And I would define long form content as 7 to 10 minutes. So you don't need to,
Not this webinar.
yeah, exactly. Webinars can be very effective though, right? Like one good strategy is you take a webinar and you cut the webinar into smaller pieces, maybe you question and answer pairs, and then you upload that to under clips or kind of short form regular videos. That can work really well. So LMs pay attention to the transcript. They pay attention to the chapters that you have in your YouTube video, the title, of course, and the description. So all these are ideally in unison, and even better, you really target them for a specific prompt, right? So best in class looks like you know your prompts and the ones that are important to you, and then you write the YouTube transcript like around these prompts, and you have the person in the video or robotic voice say the prompt verbatim so it lands in the transcript.
Okay. So if you know your customers are curious about the best fly fishing lures, then you've got whatever your list of 10 or 20 questions about this brand and this color and this river and this kind of fish or whatever. And you're basically making YouTube videos that call out that question and answer it in a unique and authoritative way.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And does any of this change in terms of YouTube for B2B? Is there anything about like the company page structure or the description? Do those matter, or is it mostly about the video content?
It's just the video content. The channel itself doesn't matter. It helps to have engagement, obviously, on the YouTube videos. But from a pure AI search perspective, it's just the video that matters.
Okay. And is schema still important?
Schema is one of these controversial things. I myself, I myself don't recommend to prioritize schema highly. If it's easy for you to implement, go for it. But then there are some studies that show that schema does have some significance. And one of my studies, it also came up. And so that's why I wouldn't say completely ignore it, but prioritize it at the bottom of the totem pole. Focus much more on some of these other things we spoke about: crawlability, retrievability, content, distribution, and then somewhere put in schema. And so for me, it's really a question of the effort and less of the returns because it's so hard to measure right now.
Okay. Now, on these different places, whether it's YouTube or social or Reddit, do the comments matter as well, or is it mostly the primary content?
The comments matter. I've seen comments getting cited and getting used.
Okay.
Um, that's where you want to probably write a bit more, right? Like a short single sentence comment typically doesn't get retrieved or does not get pulled in. And it also matters how high up the page the comment is. Right? We spoke earlier about how LMs pay attention to the beginning of the page. So if you can get upvoted with like a decently long comment, that can really help. But if that's what you need to be in the race in the first place.
Okay. What about podcasts?
Podcasts help. I've not seen podcasts being cited on like these classic transcription aggregator platforms. But what I would do is I would upload the podcast either as audio only or video only to your website, and then show the transcript below it. And that can really help creating retrievable content because for some niche topics podcasts will be, or the transcripts will be used. And it always depends on how much content there already is and how good it is. So if you have incredible content, say from an authority figure about a topic where there just isn't that much, that is a great way to get mentioned and cited.
Okay. And then you mentioned earlier, if you've got connections with well-known publishing brands like Andreessen Horowitz, I guess if they publish the podcast with the transcript on their site, that's also pretty good signal.
Yes, it can help. The more authoritative the site, the more attention LMs generally pay to it, and the more willing LMs are to invest retrieval budget into these sites, meaning they're more forgiving, and it's more likely that they look at all the pages on these sites. Whereas if you're not an authority, if you're not known as a brand yet, they might just look at a few of your pages, and you can figure that out in your server log files. You can look at how often LM bots come to crawl your content, whether it's for training or it's um, for citations or live retrieval, or you can figure that out in Cloudflare or Akamai, meaning your CDN. So that is something worth paying attention to. Because there's a chance that you create outstanding content, and for whatever reason, because it's not quickly accessible or not well linked or so, or not known to the crawlers, they don't come to retrieve it, and that means you'll never be visible with it.
Okay. What about reviews? I mean, there's obviously like Google reviews for local or services, and then the B2B reviews like G2 and Capterra, um, and then just like regular old Trustpilot and things like that. Do those carry much weight? Is that a lever?
They carry a lot of weight. funny enough, I used to work full time at G2, but like 7 years ago, and now I'm working with G2 again as a client, or they're my client, better said. And I've had the honor to go really deep on their internal data to truly understand how LLMs view them. And what I found is that um, reviews are kind of the trust layer of LLMs, right? So to take a step back. LLMs have a very high interest in being accurate and reliable. And for that, they use different layers of the web. Publisher content is one layer, social content is one layer, and reviews are another layer. And reviews have outsized weight because they tend to be objective. And because they tend to be written by users of the product. So G2 has very high standards for filtering out reviews that come from people who have not actually used the product. So you have to, for example, upload a screenshot to prove that you're using the product, etc. And there's people on the other end that accept your reviews. And so we found that LMs strongly lean on reviews from G2, Capterra, GetApp, Software Advice, etc. And they can really impact how you're being recommended on AI search, in what order, and for what type of person in ICP. So investing reviews, super helpful. Running review campaigns, or even just in your product, right? After an NPS survey or after onboarding, ask people to write and leave a review. And then you also want to mine reviews for potential product feedback, or for brand perception input, or for brand sentiment risks. So the benefit of reviews is not just that you help LMs better understand how good your product is, what to recommend you. They're also in helping you understand how your audience perceives your product.
And then by that rationale, probably competitors' reviews as well.
Competitor reviews as well. Absolutely. You can use them to refine your positioning, develop narrative, develop content, know how you stack up, right? It's incredibly helpful. And I think more and more of these platforms now have MCP as well. So you can factor that right into your, like, you can pull that right into your content strategy or brief or messaging products.
Amazing. You just said you kind of glossed over something in your previous answer that I just want to call out for everyone because I think it's brilliant and underutilized, which is don't just ask every customer to give you a review. At their moment of like highest satisfaction, right after they've onboarded or used the service, send an NPS survey. And if they say they are likely to recommend, send them to the review site. If they say they're not likely to recommend, send them to some kind of product feedback or customer service flow. So you're positively biasing the reviews.
100%, 100%. I mean, there is something as two good reviews, right? When a product has 5 stars only, you're like, that's kind of weird. And I think it's unachievable if you actually source reviews. But yeah, whether it's 4 or 5 star reviews, as long as they're strong, even sometimes a 3 star review, if it's balanced and fair, can actually increase trust from your target audience, but also from LLMs into your product.
Okay. Now, I know it's been said that Reddit is weighted pretty heavily in the training of these models. Is that still true? If you're not a Redditor, if you don't have those karma points or whatever, is there a way to influence that?
It is true. Reddit is still a strong source of citations and of training data, right? It's very important to distinguish between just the training and the citations. As I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, training means that the LLM might not cite the conversation on Reddit. It might just give the answer, right? Same true for any training sources. Citation is much more geared towards live retrieval. So a topic that is new and fresh. Um, it is so it's still important in that sense. It's very difficult to influence. Reddit has very strong antibodies, and it's basically an aggregate of thousands and maybe millions of mini communities that all hate to be manipulated, right? So if it's very obvious that you are an external agent, not in the AI sense, but like a change agent, and you try to insert positive sentiment about a product, that will either be deleted by the admin, or you'll get a lot of friendly comments from the rest of the community. So it is a social first approach. You can absolutely, I would say, be part of that conversation to your benefit for sure. But it's, first of all, it's a long long-term investment. You first need to lurk, you need to understand the community, the behaviors, the norms, the rules. Then you need to slowly contribute, and then at some point you can be maybe a bit more brand forward with your posts and with your comments. But until you get there, we're talking about 6 months, maybe longer. So long-term investment with no guaranteed outcome or benefit. There absolutely is a scenario that either the subreddit will just not allow anybody to be brand forward at all, or your brand is burned. Like I've seen cases in which you can do whatever you want, right? Um, the Your brand is just not in good favor in the community. So the way that I make this tangible for my clients is to say, okay, let's critically assess the most important subreddits. Let's look at our prompts, citations, mentions, which of those are actually influenced by Reddit, what are the subreddits that influence them the most, and let's just get a lay of the land. What are the conversations about? What are the public rules? Who are the admins? Just lurk and observe and see what's going on here. If we see an opportunity to either maybe right size some wrong information about our product or become part of the conversation, let's go. But first validate that. And then, of course, the second is always a question about should we start our own subreddit? And you can do that, but you don't just want to, build a house and hope somebody moves in. You need a community building strategy behind that. And even when you do that, you need to brace yourself maybe for some feedback and for some criticism, right? Again, the people have an opinion about your product, whether you want to or not. And if you open a subreddit, then you invite those people in. Sometimes that can lead to incredibly powerful conversations that find their ways into AI answers. And sometimes it leads to not much. So you want to be very thoughtful about your Reddit investment. It still matters a lot. And this is not a short hack. This is long-term.
Okay. So to summarize, and apologies for the language, but don't fuck around with Reddit. Don't try to game it because it can backfire in a nasty way. But if you have a loyal community of committed users, if you do have a strong customer experience and a bunch of loyal users, it can be a real amplifier for you. And if you want to get involved, just do it right, do it in earnest, get a feel for the norms, become part of the community and be helpful.
Exactly. A quick hack, actually. Advertising on Reddit is a great way to figure out if your audience is there and what they think about you. Do you get some engagement, some clicks, maybe some conversions from Reddit advertising? Great. So maybe spend a little bit of money to validate, and then decide from there.
Okay, so start with paid just to see if your audience is there and how they engage with the content. Potentially start those conversations.
Yes.
But beware, it could backfire if if there's
Get
people
ready,
out there who
man.
already resent you.
Oh yeah, for
Have
sure. Or they
beef
learn
with
to
you.
resent you.
Sorry?
Or they learn to resent you.
Or they'll learn to resent you. Okay. So for marketers, there's always this decision about kind of building up the company brand versus a personal brand of a founder, especially in startups. As you know, there's a lot of platforms that just completely suppress company brands. Understandably, social media is about people. So any advice on walking the line between personal brand, company brand, both, how to allocate resources there?
My point is they're inseparable, and you want to push them forward. People follow people, and you see, like sure, Elon Musk is like always an often mentioned example, but I think another one that stands out to me is Alex Karp from Palantir, who does a really good job in kind of constantly being out there. Rarely talks about Palantir at all, but talks a lot about current world events and how they tie back to the company. So people are really interested in founders and CEOs or leaders in general. You want to identify your strongest ambassadors, and most of the time that's going to be the founder. And you want to equip them with a narrative, like having something to say. Again, tying that to current events out there in the news. To a story, right? Like, what's the founder arc? What's the company's arc? What problem are they trying to solve? Why is that problem important? Blah, 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 blah. Like the classic PR storytelling narratives. And then three, you want to translate that to all the UGC platforms, LinkedIn's, the YouTubes. You want to create content for them. You don't need to go all Gary Vee, where you have like a 5 people team around you at all times, but you want to be thoughtful about this. Stripe is another fantastic example, right? There's a reason that they recently started their video podcast, something Pint, forgot the name. But this is like one of the two CEOs spending their time on a podcast, right? That should tell you everything about how important that is. So to me, it goes back to audience building and brand building, and it has a really, really strong impact. Now, when we tie that to AI search, the way we want to think about this is that it's typically CEOs and founders who have the most exposure to tier one media, and so you want to basically give them scripts like say these things in that way, not for a full interview, right? But keep these three sentences in mind and say them on tier one media to help with mentions and positioning of your product in those media outlets. I would go to that extreme for sure.
The information density of this conversation is insane. I'm watching the comments go by and everyone's like, "Oh, do you guys have a newsletter?" So for everyone listening, we both have newsletters. We'll add you to mine. We'll send you a link to Kevin's tomorrow, and we will send you a link to the full recording of this podcast or this conversation on YouTube. So you can go share it, refer back to it. So don't worry. Yes, you get all that stuff. And Kevin, this is just, yeah, as I said, just like the right answer, straight to the point, concise, almost as if it were being recorded for the purposes of training large language models.
Right, right. I shouldn't mention my name more often. Just kidding, just kidding.
Um, so I guess a couple questions as we kind of get towards wrapping up here. In terms of like, we talked a bit earlier about metrics and what to track. There's obviously like this huge Cambrian explosion of tools and data that mention citations and this and that. Any of those worth listening to or thinking about? Any that you think are good value for money, or are these things all just going to get added to the tools we're all already using?
It's a good question because there's a lot of content and a lot of competition. Everybody and their grandmother starts a prompt tracker. It's so funny because like so many people from outside of the SEO world are coming to this space, and so I get like at least one LinkedIn DM a week where somebody's reaching out and it's like, "Hey, Kevin, we've built a tool to monitor how brands show up on ChatGPT," and it's like, "Yeah, get in line, please. There's 1,000 people in front of you." And so, you know, I would say I would select the tool not just by the prompt tracking capabilities, but also in their capabilities of the action layer. So the action layer is essentially the way to execute against those insights. First layer is the insight layer. Where are we? What is important? Who's dominating our space? Second layer is what can we do about it? And that's usually where tooling right now is at the content stage, where they help you create and refresh content and make sure you're positioning yourself the right way, etc. So that tools can do that pretty well these days. Where it lacks is kind of on the distribution side, and I'm not sure that should ever be automated, right? But like getting mentioned by certain sites. I'm always skeptical and critical when tools are trying to automate that. We've seen that in the SEO space, and it ended poorly. So you want to be careful on that front. But there are some tools that do that really well. I'm very biased towards Aerops because Aerops is a client of mine. So just know that. But of course, there are the Profounds, there are the Scrunches of the world, and then SEMrush and Ahrefs are adding capabilities as well. SEMrush has a really good enterprise product with some like cool features, that stand out to me. But at the end of the day, it depends a lot on like your budget, your like what tool you're already committed to, and what you're trying to get out of. And again, for the last point, I think you really want to think about the execution layer or implementation layer, not just about the raw insights themselves.
Can you give me an example to make this idea of the action layer concrete?
100%. So action layer could mean you track X prompts, you realize you have a gap in a topic where a competitor is ahead. You realize that they've recently created a lot of really good content about that topic. You have some outdated content and a couple of pieces that you should create. So the action layer means you can actually use the tool to refresh or rewrite some of your existing content and write the new content with the strong caveat that you want to still have a human in the loop here, right? You want to have at least an editor or a writer, not just fact check the content, but also build on the drafts that are created by AI, just to basically outsource the legwork to the content and to the tools and to the AI. But then think about what else can we do to make that piece world class? Maybe inject some experience, maybe inject some primary data, right? These types of things. The tools are getting better, but there's still a lot of value to having some human input.
What about the role of AI in the content creation process? Are they all pretty good at filtering out AI slop? Is it part of the workflow? Should it be avoided? Is it risky?
There's a risk. There is a risk for sure, but I think it's a relatively low risk if you know what you're doing. If you go to Claude and just say, write me an article about X, that is the wrong approach. I personally found that AI can take a lot of legwork, take on a lot of legwork, like maybe the research, like maybe stress testing your content, writing a draft, the illustrations and graphics, and all that kind of stuff. But the best content still comes from humans plus machine. Again, things like light refreshes, different thing. Like you can automate that stuff and you get really, really good results. Maybe even medium refreshes and rewrites. But for net new content, especially in the context of our conversation earlier, where we said that you want to have a good mix, a good diet of three macronutrients, right? Which is some audience specific content, some pure performance content, some thought leadership or PR content. Um, so, given that, we're not yet at the place where you can reliably outsource all of your content to AI. And maybe we never get to that place because it is really that kind of human aspect that people want to relate to. And so an extreme example could be you create the draft with AI and then you ask the CEO of a quote, right? We said people follow people, CEOs need to be present and put content out there, right? So there is ways to make content better. And what I found is that not enough companies ask themselves, okay, how do we make this piece of content world class? What would it take for this to be the best piece of content about that topic on the web? Pretty intimidating, but that's the standard you have to bring to the table because the content creation is faster and cheaper than ever before.
Okay. So the bar has always been high, but it's no longer like top three search results. It's even higher. It's really world-class original content, however you can create it.
Yeah.
So what do you, kind of zooming out and thinking broadly in the last couple of minutes we have together, marketing organizations, marketing teams have invested a lot in SEO. They're seeing that traffic go away. They have people, they have tools, they have content creation engines. Obviously, there's a lot of work and a lot of opportunity in terms of optimizing for LLMs. What do you kind of see as the future shape of a marketing organization, a marketing budget around this, around getting found?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, there's a very interesting case where HubSpot, which coined the term inbound marketing, lost like 80% of their organic traffic. And the reason that loss in traffic does not correlate with their stock price is because much earlier before their traffic tanked, they invested in audience building, right? They bought The Hustle for a couple million. They built an army of newsletters, podcasts, YouTube channels, right? They really flipped the script. You also have examples like Okta, which hired six full-time journalists into a newsroom team that now creates second touch news. And so the future looks much more like corporate journalism and audience building and a mix of SEO, performance marketing, brand marketing, and product marketing, right? These things that traditionally are pretty siloed, they're melting together. The best teams that I had the pleasure of working with, they create these teams from the ground up. I'm not talking about dotted lines or like, cross-functional teams. I'm talking about teams that are single threaded, composed of different like channel experts from different channels that go after a singular goal. That is kind of what I see as the future. And that's where startups have the upper hand because the reality is a sales force is not going to create such a team. But a new attacker will absolutely might have to create such a team. And that's their advantage. They can pull all these strings, be present on all these different outlets with a unified strategy, unified messaging, unified positioning, and then attack the market with a united front. That's what I see the future.
So in the old days, we used to use SEO visibility to try to get people to our site to try to convert them into an owned audience through lead magnets or newsletters or whatever. And now you're saying build that owned audience. Like that, at no point does that become a bad idea. And if you do it well, it's going to increase your LLM citations, but build it through the channels where you can reach people, whether it's Substack or your social audience or LinkedIn or wherever. And it's not wasted effort. It has the double duty if you're creating world-class content of building your visibility for LLMs.
Bingo.
Awesome. Well, we are just about out of time. Kevin, this was incredible. My brain is full and it hurts. Um, but we'll send the video out to everyone who joined. Again, thank you so much. And everyone on the call, we'll send a link to Kevin's Substack. It is truly world-class content. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So thank you very much. And thanks everyone who joined.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to fill your brain. And thank you everyone for, for joining and the great questions as well. This was a treat.
All right. Awesome. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye, guys.